What's like the formula for figuring out if your subject matter is one in which you can include your first person voice?
I think we would probably answer that differently too, though, because I know that one thing Simon said, is that it's more, you can be more relatable. If you're first person, you can, or maybe not. Because sometimes, I know you gave the example about a party, and it's just much more compelling if it's first person as opposed to, well, the person might be a crashing bore and they might be speaking in the first person, right? So it can absolutely be. And I think it might be more powerful or it may not be. And the other thing which sort of caught my ear was Simon as well said, that it's intuitive. And I think it's great what you played. And so I'm not, saying it's not. But for me, there is a process of thinking about. It's not just intuitive. It's not just unconscious, like I'm going to tell this from my perspective and others. It's absolutely a kind of, what am I bringing to this by using the word I? What depth, what insight, the level of taste involved, boundaries, and what is a boundary transgression? And I think just that journey of reflection, you may or may not decide to in the end. I think it shouldn't be unconscious. I think you should consciously think about it yourself and speak to your editor, about it. So there's a struggle there about what you can offer. So when I work as an editor as well with freelancers who do programs for ideas, and Simon's experienced this too, but for example, Hassan Santour, we've done 13 one-hour programs together. Right now he's in Mogadishu, but he was doing a program called Things We Lost in the War about the story of his country. He did not want to put himself. And I said, okay, Hassan, let me get this straight. You're Somali Canadian. You came here with your single, like your mother and 6 children, your siblings, and you left Somalia 1 minute before the civil war erupted. And you have nothing to say. I mean, that is, but Hassan is really sensitive. He's a novelist. He said, but I don't want it to be self-indulgent. And I can't speak for my fellow Somali citizens. And I can't speak for those that are still there. So we went through a very long process of what he could actually bring to it. And some of his images, about falling asleep at night, listening to the radio, the dictator, the president, who ended up being a dreadful man, but he would fall asleep and almost hear what the president said as fairy tales. Nobody else can tell us that but Hassan, and it was very rich for that reason when I started to get him to tell me, before he obviously wrote the essays, throughout, about that. So I think it's kind of a journey. I think it is something that you really have to give careful consideration to, and ask yourself a lot of questions. So
I would just I'll pass this to you, Simon. I would just add too. I think I really love first person. The I in stories, but the I doesn't have to be this I. Like you could have Beza tell her story in the first person and cut yourself out, and that's still going to have the power of that first person storytelling. It's just not you. So I feel like I feel like for me it's an access thing in terms of is Beza going to share all her secrets with me? If not, maybe I find another I, or are all of those secrets and images in your own head? In which case the I becomes you. So
yeah, and I mean, I certainly wouldn't. For me, I didn't mean to give the impression that it was a sort of light or trite decision. I think for me it's more stylistic, I have to say, to be honest. I mean, I think that I do honestly feel like maybe there is a stylistic change going on in radio, and I feel like the I is part of that change. I think that, like I said, shows like Serial very much would have been uncomfortable for people a few years ago. I think taking that type of really stepping into somebody's story as the producer, you could argue that was really, what right did she have to be in this murder investigation? She really, she became a major character And so I'm not saying it's always appropriate. I mean, I was listening to Steve Wadham's amazing First World War series on ideas last night, and it's all archival tape from the First World War. And yeah, I think it would be ridiculous in that to have somebody being like, really putting themselves into that. It's not needed. You've got all the material there. So I wouldn't argue that it's always appropriate, but I would argue that in the kind of stories I like to tell, I feel it does break down the wall between you and the listener. And I think that my point is not that also that you wouldn't have somebody else using the eye. I think in all of my pieces, it's more about that than me. But if I'm going to be in there and, with an hour-long documentary, I'm probably going to be in there at some point. I feel like I'm going to drop the formality a little bit if I can get away with it. So I think, obviously it's a decision that has to be made. The more sensitive your topic, or the more it's not your story, the more you have to be careful about putting yourself in there. And like I said, I'm not in there wall to wall, or I'm not the main character sometimes. But if it's something that you like stylistically, I would argue that, try and find a way to do it. Maybe it just doesn't work out and you cut yourself out. But
And some shows are different too, right? I mean, Ideas has, I think, always encouraged that.
Yeah.
I think more so than a lot of shows, because I came from Sunday morning. Steve Wadhams did too, a long time ago, and that was it was more of a current affairs show, as opposed to Ideas is, I think, a deeper exploration. What always struck me by fellow producers that went off into the field, the stories they came back, and the first person stuff was fascinating. Then I'd hear the program on the air, 15 or 20 minutes, like, my God, that encounter they had with that peasant was extraordinarily gone. All gone, right? And I remember one of the only times at Sunday morning, this is before Ideas, I was sent off to do a program on the new feminist pornographers. And I was sent because I'm a fundamentalist feminist. I was like virulently anti-porn, just shoot them all, right? Maybe that's my Buffy thing coming out, but I was sent for that reason. And so the opening essay, I talked about being this fundamentalist feminist, ridding society of all porn. I mean, they let me do that. And then the piece was actually my own journey. Like seeing the movies, these feminist pornographers in New York, I thought, these are really lovely. There's nobody being killed, raped. There's a sensitivity. So I horrified myself. And actually, so that was probably the only one where I was really like, it was all about me. Mm-hmm. But generally, you're right. There's been a shift, I think, at CBC, where there's more of that is encouraged. I think Ideas has been like that, more so than other shows, but I think other shows as well. But there's so many squiggly lines. Yeah. And there are pitfalls, and they're not all great, and some of them are wonderful. So,
how do you decide that a story that has to do with you is worth telling? And I ask because I think for a lot of us who come from news backgrounds, it's really, we've come to check off certain boxes in terms of timeliness and the other kind of criteria that we use to judge whether a news story is worth telling. But when something happens to you, like Mieke, when this idea that started to come into your head about wanting to get this wax, I wonder, we all have conversations with our friends and with our families that seem interesting to us, and then when we go into the real world, people are like, oh, that's not that interesting. So I wonder how you figure out when a story that you have, where you're a character in the story, is worth sharing with others, kind of like in your case, Simon, with your wife.
I'll jump in just because I'm holding the mic quickly. But I think for the waxing piece, it just felt so obvious that I was going to be in it. But I feel constantly like other stories that I might have a connection with, I'm just like, oh, no one cares. It's just me. It's boring. So it's good question.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's something that I struggled with, actually, with that particular piece with it. And I was thinking, is this something that is only of concern to me and my wife, And I think that part of that is, I think it comes from there is this impression also, like you said, that if we're not supposed to interview friends and family, in news. It's like, that's in the book, it's like, as sources, it's like documentary making, though. I think that we should be more open than more closed. I think you still have to go through the same pitching process. I still had to pitch that story to my editor, and while she liked me, she isn't going to put everything that I pitch on the air. So she vetted it and said, yeah, this touches a larger social issue. And it did. It ended up generating a lot of feedback. So I think there's asking other people, like you said, is this interesting, is a great first step. But also, I think we shouldn't be afraid to mine that material, because, there's so much stuff that happens in our personal lives, and we're so close to it, and nobody can tell those stories sometimes better than us. And if it is something interesting, like with the piece I'm doing now about my former friend who's in prison, nobody would be able to get access to him. He wasn't even that interested in talking to me. So, if I just said right away, oh, I have too much of a personal connection, it's going to be about me and him and stuff, that story would have never been told. So, go for it, but then
You need
talk to people.
You need a good editor too, though, because I think tone is really important. There was a program on Ideas, and it could only be told by the maker of that program or freelancer. I don't know her. She was the daughter of a drag queen. It was called Misunderstanding and Misbehavior. Her father is now dead, and just finding all these old ball gowns of her father's. And it was a lovely show. It was all about her family and her dad and all of that. I thought it was a really charming show, but for me, there were a few places when she was giggling too much with her sister. And, sometimes less is more. And it kind of then, if I lose the connection, just like if you go see a film and the director, and you're into it, right? Then all of a sudden you're like, oh, gee, right? There was a misstep there. There was a lack of authenticity. The narrative flow, we've all had that experience, right? And it's the same thing with the radio program too. And I love this show, by the way, this daughter, of a drag queen, but it felt too insiderish, just a titch in a few places where she's giggling. And I thought, no, I want to giggle. Let me have the response here. Don't take that response away from me. So that's sort of another example where tone, but the piece could not have been done. I mean, it was clearly her story to tell, and it was a really wonderful one. So it's so subtle sometimes. And it's a sensibility. I mean, it's subjective, right? You could listen to it, or you could listen to it and say to me, well, that didn't bother me, right? But I think you have to have extra antenna up if you're going to do that.
Next question.
Okay.
Do you worry at all about being a likable character? And I I ask that because I think when you're doing a story about somebody else, you may or may not care about that factor. You want the story to be good. And then when it's yourself, to what extent do you have to let go of your ego, have yourself? I know you mentioned that you like putting in the thing that kind of takes the stuffing out of yourself, but yeah, I just wonder how you negotiate that, and how you negotiate having people react positively or negatively to you.
I was gonna say no, and then I was like, that's a lie. I guess yes. I guess for me, I want the listener to respect me. Like they don't have to, like, they can think that I'm doing something stupid, and maybe I'm doing something stupid and I'm including it in my piece to sort of make a point. I guess I just don't want to come across as dumb. I think with the waxing piece too, and I deal with my pain through laughing and, anger and stuff like that. So I'm sort of a jokey person, but I also didn't want, I was worried about coming across as flaky. I think that's, you want to be smart, and at the end of the day, I guess, have them, come away from your piece having been like, oh, I didn't think of something in that way, or that, opened some sort of window for me. So yeah, I wish I could say no, but I feel like it's yes. Do you want to jump in? Or?
Do you want to, Simon?
Yeah, okay. Well, I think
Good question.
Great questions. Yeah. No, I think it's true. It's something that I think in my very first piece, which was about my hometown and the number one highway which ran through it. So it's this really tiny town and this huge thing happening. And so it was a lot about me, and I was in there a lot. And at first, I really worried about that, and kind of like I didn't like myself almost in there, And I think I just let go, to be honest, in general. And I think the more that I was on tape, and the more I put myself out there, and the more I listened to me on tape, and the more I heard myself being stupid on tape or on the radio, or maybe, the more I just became comfortable that this is me. I wouldn't want to make a character in my piece either, falsely smart or falsely stupid. And I feel it's the same way with myself. I know that I have the control, I'm the one who gets to make what people are like. And I feel it would be unfair if I didn't present an honest portrait of myself too. And so we all have an ego, but at the same time, I try really hard to fight against that, because I think I'm a character like everyone else. I would hope that, I would present myself honestly. So.
Well put.
I don't think I really have much more to say. I do think I agree with Simon that sometimes those bits of humor, it sounds like I just do all these dreadful serial killer blah blah, but no, I do keep when there's an awkward moment, or I catch someone being silly, or they catch me, I'll leave it in. If they go, well, that's a really strange question, I'll leave that comment in. So I think it's a connecting force. I think people connect with you more if you leave those outtakes in. Which doesn't mean it's about you. That's really about the listener too, and sort of including them.
Thank you so much.